Okay, US 1 college students, this will be our first lecture of the year. I titled it New World Beginnings because we're dealing with European discovery or perhaps invasion of the New World, right? There's many ways in which this could be framed, as there were already thousands upon thousands of people live in distinct cultures already living on this continent. Sometimes that word discovery, right, New World, can be problematic. But we want to deal with that today and what happened when the Europeans encountered North America for the first time. But let's take a look at those early Americans first. And you probably know the story at least a little bit here. You know, the story goes that early peoples migrated across the Bering Land Bridge from Asia about 35,000 years ago. Now, there have been some disputed theories over the years. Some archaeologists and anthropologists theorize that there were sea route migrations that may have occurred before this, that perhaps the first peoples reached North America by sea or by some type of seafaring vessel. Uh, Evidence that human remains may have existed in the Americas 50,000 years ago has also occurred. There's been some debate to that. And I'm not an expert on this, just a little bit of light reading on it. Uh, there are those who state that the oldest remains of human beings have been found in Africa, that our original origination point is in Africa. Some people theorize uh, that there are separate origins, that perhaps there were humans originated in Africa and humans originated in other parts of the world, maybe even America. So there's all kinds of theories out there. The one I just mentioned is kind of called the separate or multiple origins theory. The evidence that most strongly supports that the original origination of persons was probably in Africa and that we all migrated from there. But as we talked about the other day, history is debated, right? And there's always new evidence being found. Okay, so what happened in America is we see the development of some very diverse civilizations. And what we see is well-developed, highly advanced nation states developing in Central and South America, which I tried to indicate on this map here. These colored regions here are major nation states that developed, and those major nation states include the Aztec, the Maya, and the Inca. And we're also going to mention the Iroquois, but the Iroquois are up in North America. And so these are major nation states that develop advanced technologies for the time period. And really, what happens that allows these nation states to develop is the spread of corn and corn cultivation and an organized agricultural system. If you look at this other picture here, what we see is an incredibly advanced city for the time period. This is the Aztec city of Tenochtitlan. And this is just an incredibly well engineered, clean, thriving city that the Spaniards will be incredibly amazed by when they discover it. Now, understand I'm giving you the very much watered down version here. There's much more to these stories, but suffice it to say that when Europeans first came upon Tenochtitlan, it was the most advanced city in the world in terms of its incredibly well functioning systems of travel, commercial trade, um, environment, the cleanliness of it. It was just absolutely an amazing achievement. Sadly, will be conquered by the Spaniards. Um, okay, I don't know why this double click is up there, but please ignore that. Now, in contrast to Central and South America, most native peoples of North America were living in small, scattered, and impermanent settlements at the time of European arrival. So you see an incredible amount of diversity in Northern America in particular. This map's a little bit blurry, it didn't quite turn out as well as I would like it to, but you can see just the names. Look, these are all names of different tribes that developed in North America. Now, they don't develop the advanced civilizations for the most part that we see with the Aztec and the Mayans and the Incas. Several diverse tribes here, nomadic, uh, sometimes warred with each other over disputed territory. Corn cultivation comes later to these cultures, which did have something to do with their lack of sophisticated development when compared to the Aztecs and the Incas. There were some exceptions, of course. I mentioned the Iroquois earlier. The Iroquois, who primarily settle in New York State, which is somewhere in this region here, right? The Iroquois will come to dominate that region. They're going to create the Iroquois Confederacy, which is another well-developed nation state. Basically, the Iroquois are going to govern over several different tribes um, and govern them loosely, maybe somewhat similar to our Articles of Confederation. And they're going to create a constitution that, quite frankly, is much like our current constitution. So the Iroquois were quite advanced as well in their developments and their system of governing. One of the more advanced tribes in North America, to be sure. Much more we could talk about with Native peoples, of course, but once again, this is just an overview lecture. So, what causes the Europeans to become interested in uh, North America, or what would come to become the Americas, I should say, and to interfere with the cultures of what we've come to call Native Americans? Well, basically, wealth, right? Profit is going to be a key factor. The Europeans develop a desire for Asian goods. Now, we're talking about the Americas, but trade with Asia is going to spur contact with the Americas. So the Europeans have developed a desire for Asian goods. Um, the Crusades are going to be one of the things that bring Europeans into contact with those goods. And what I can tell you is that the Crusades was as much about gold and riches as it was about Christianity versus the Islamic faith, right? The Europeans wanted to continue trade with Asia after the Crusades had ended. And once again, the Crusades were as much about trade as they were anything else, uh, despite a war between two different religions. The products that were desired from Asia were silk, different kinds of drugs, opiates, perfume, spices, and then sugar. And I've got sugar with an exclamation point here because that's going to be the good that is heavily desired. And once again, the Crusades had exposed Europeans to these goods. Sugar is going to be a key factor in European commercial trade, and that is going to transfer itself to the New World, as sugar will lead to commercial wealth and, tragically, slavery to a large degree. Uh, the journey to acquire these Asian goods was treacherous and it was expensive. You had Muslim middlemen, so to speak, who would literally exact a heavy toll. They would expect to be paid for Europeans traveling on this journey. Sometimes conflict would occur, of course, on these journeys. So it's just there needs to be a better way in which the Europeans can profit from all of this without having to dealing with Muslim empires in the process. And the journey itself was treacherous by land and by sea at the current way in which it can be done. Marco Polo is another factor here. The journeys of Marco Polo can sometimes be exaggerated. You see a depiction of here, kind of an artist's rendering of him here. But Marco Polo was an Italian adventurer who returned to Europe in 1295, perhaps from China. He'd been traveling since birth, as his father was an adventurer and explorer. Um, Once again, he had been out of Europe for about 20 years, and he had many tales to tell. And his journeys are often exaggerated in movies and things like that. But his journeys and his tales, so to speak, are another factor in sparking European interest. So here's a map for you. So this map deals with, kind of shows us the issue. Uh, European empires, of course, over here, England, France, Spain come to mind, Portugal, right? These empires want access to the goods of Asia, and all these routes just are cumbersome and dangerous. And once again, dealing with Muslim middlemen, it's difficult to sail around the coast of Africa because the prevailing winds, kind of depicted with this arrow here, I suppose, that make it difficult to sail around the tip of Africa. So people are seeking a better way, right? A better way to make this journey. Now, the Portuguese do come up with a little bit of a better way, in that in 1450 they invent the caravel. Now, the caravel is a ship that could more closely sail into the wind. It could literally go into the wind. And this will allow the Portuguese to sail the western coast of Africa and return home from Africa against the northerly winds, right? So it allowed them to travel down the coast against winds that might be coming up here, but also to return, okay, against winds that might be hitting them this way, so to speak. It's probably the best I can explain it anyway. Uh, these journeys around the coast of Africa will lead to the development of gold and, tragically, a slave trade. And the Portuguese appetite for slavery will be enormous, and will dwarf the modest scale of pre-European slavery that Arabs and Africans had indulged in profit, but also in cruelty. Uh, the slave trading itself, you're going to see, will be a factor in really American history, both pre-United States and early United States, that will become a big business. Uh, Not only will elites, so to speak, or business entrepreneurs, or however you want to state it, wealthy elites, not only will they profit with managing sugar plantations, but the slave trade and the trade in human beings will become immensely profitable as well. And that is something that we'll talk about at varying points in this course, as unfortunately slavery is a running theme through much of American history, as well as the civil rights conflicts we still endure as a result of that legacy. Okay, time to mention Columbus, and Columbus is going to be mentioned in Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. I'm going to have you kids read an additional article about him, probably. I know for sure I'm going to have you look at a primary source about him. You can see his journeys pictured here. I've got these other pictures pictured up, but they're just different likenesses of him, so I'm not going to worry about those right now. But you've got, these are Columbus's journeys. So this is a map of his journey. So you'll notice he does not reach the coast of North America, South America, but what Columbus discovers is the Caribbean islands on his journeys to the so-called New World. Now, Columbus had spent many years looking for someone to sponsor his. I'm sure you know the story of Columbus. Eventually, he'd be sponsored by the newly unified Spain under the reign of Isabella and Ferdinand, which your text does go into some detail on this. Basically, Ferdinand and Isabella had driven the Muslim Moors out of Spain. Basically, they united Spain after centuries of Christian and Islamic warfare in Spain itself. Spain is pictured here. And it began to shape a modern national state that could afford the cost of discovery. You got to fund discovery; it's expensive. As Europeans began to demand more and more cheap goods from beyond the Mediterranean. So basically, Spain wants to cash in on this market of goods from beyond the Mediterranean, and they've got the funding to do so as they unite their nation states. And the Renaissance period is also occurring in this time period. That'll be mentioned in your text. And that's going to contribute to this knowledge and spirit of adventure as New World peoples, as new World peoples, and during the time of this Renaissance, this period of high learning, New World peoples in North and South America are unknowingly awaiting their discoverers, as I have quoted in my notes here. And discoverers would be in quotations in this particular case. So Columbus is going to land on the Bahamas on October 12, 1492, right? He's seeking a water route to the Indies, and mistakenly, historians debate to this day whether Columbus ever really figured out what he discovered. So there's some debate as to whether or not he mistakenly discovered another continent, and also, discovery is once again another issue since other peoples had been living there for centuries, and discovery is based on the person who tells the story, right? I'm sure native peoples wouldn't like to give credit to Columbus discovering North America. But what this is going to result in is the Columbian Exchange, where European markets capital and technology with African labor and New World raw materials, all of that comes together. And Columbus is also going to spark explorers continually seeking a landmass or a route through the landmass that Columbus discovered, whether it be Central America, North America, or South America, that would be a quicker trip to the Indies or Asia. Europeans, of course, will finally realize the true significance of this discovery in the bringing of these continents together. Okay, so just a little bit more on the Columbian Exchange to kind of clarify. Don't be surprised if you have a written response about this or use it for a written response. So what happens with the Columbian Exchange is the so-called New World, the Americas, introduced tobacco, maize, beans, and tomatoes and potatoes to the Old World, and the Old World introduced things like cattle, swine, horses, and sugarcane. They also unwittingly brought some other things, grasses, dandelions, literally dandelion seeds on the bottom of their shoes. But tragically, they bring disease. They bring disease. A key thing to note, a key stat to be aware of, is that 3/5 of crops developed in the world today will originate in the Americas. Smallpox. I mentioned that tragically Europeans brought disease to the New World. It's tragic to state, but the reality is that old world diseases would devastate Native American cultures. And the reality is that Native Americans, quite frankly, were much more clean than Europeans. It's always ironic to me that the Europeans like to call Native Americans savage, and typically Native Americans were more loving to one another in most cases, and more cleanly, and in many cases less warlike, but yet they're the ones being called savage, even though some of them had created major nation states and so on and so forth. It's interesting how these labels develop, right? But anyway, they had no immunities to these diseases. They had lost immunities over the years because they had not been exposed to them. Hopefully, we'll develop some immunities to COVID soon, right? Or COVID-19. 90% of Native Americans will perish as a result of essentially the Columbian Exchange. And this is an unparalleled human catastrophe. The Indians perished primarily by disease, but outright slaughter, warfare, and slavery will take its toll as well. And I just want to stress again that this is an unparalleled human catastrophe. There are several tragic genocides that have occurred throughout human history. This one cannot be matched. Even, we study the Holocaust a lot and all those things. This is just absolutely tragic, and we're going to do some more reading on it. So we'll deal a little bit more with this unparalleled human catastrophe. Now, Columbus's discoveries, of course, spur or cause more discovery, and the Spanish conquistadores will spend time. The conquistadors will spend time desiring, of course, to make new discoveries, discover gold, and so on and so forth. They'll be inspired by Columbus's travels and seek to make discoveries of their own. I want to mention the Treaty of Tordesillas here. The Treaty of Tordesillas happens in 1494. This is going to divide the New World lands between Spain and Portugal. And it really, if you look at this treaty, it looks to me like Portugal really got the short end of the stick here. And I sometimes wonder, I should probably do some more research about this. But did they truly realize the size of the continents here? Because here's the Treaty of Tordesillas line. Okay, Portugal, you get this, and Spain, you get this, right? So it looks like Spain is sure making out a lot more here, at least with South America. Now, with additional treaties that come about, Portugal will get all of Brazil, which is the largest territory, later country in South America, right? But the rest of this will be controlled by the Spaniards as a result of this treaty. And this leads to Spain becoming the dominant exploring and colonizing power of the 1500s. Now, I mentioned the Spanish conquistadors being inspired by Columbus. Their motivations are varied, right? In the service of God, right? And in the search of gold and glory, and they will conquer much of the Caribbean and Americas. Really, they had diverse motives: adventure. They wanted to win royal titles. They did, I suppose, want to spread Christianity. They wanted to escape dubious pasts. So a lot of conquistadors were criminals seeking redemption. But mostly it was the lust for gold. They wanted to get rich quick. A small minority were nobles. The nobles were often leaders of conquistador explorations. But the others were professional soldiers, sailors, or middling classes, people of the middle to lower classes from Spain. want to mention some conquistadors here. You could spend hours lecturing on each of these journeys. I'm not going to do that to you kids. This is an overview lecture. Um, Balboa, Vasco Nunez Balboa will discover the Pacific. Once again, discover has to be in quotes here, right? Ferdinand Magellan will circumnavigate the globe. He won't survive the journey, but his crew will finish it. Ponce de Leon will discover Florida. Coronado will go all the way to Francisco Coronado will go all the way to the Grand Canyon. Okay. Hernando de Soto will explore the Mississippi River. Francisco Pizarro will conquer the Incas, and Hernan Cortez will conquer the Aztecs. And they won't succeed originally on these conquerings, but they will eventually do so. There's a great video here on Tenochtitlan that shows how advanced it was, but I'm going to hold off on that because this is an overview lecture, and I want to keep it short. I just want to close with mentioning the Spanish legacy. So, Spanish legacy, the legacy of their exploration. The Aztec Empire gave way to 3 centuries of Spanish rule in Central and South America. As a result of that, the native population of Mexico will drop from 20 to 2 million. Once again, an unparalleled human catastrophe, and that's the effects of it in Central and South America and the Caribbean islands. What's interesting about Spanish conquest in terms of English conquest, and we'll get into English conquest and exploration in the coming chapters, is that the Spanish do mix more, right? The Spanish are more likely to embrace, despite the fact that they're destroying much of the native peoples, we do see the Spanish absorb some of their culture. And so we see a high degree of a mixed ancestry mestizos, people of native Central and South American descent, but also Spanish descent, more so than in North America. And we see more of a sharing of customs, laws, language, and crops in Central and South America. The English are going to be, quite frankly, more cruel. I guess it's hard to say that because Spanish conquest had a high degree of cruelty itself. But the English are going to be less interested in mixing of cultures. They're going to view the Native Americans they conquer, at least after a while, as relations sour. They're going to seek to displace them. They're going to seek to enslave them, kill them, or force them to completely assimilate to English culture. And those are legacies that still persist and still trouble really our modern times. And so these different approaches are important to be aware of. Both of them are incredibly cruel, right? In terms of how native peoples are treated. And we're going to do some reading on that. Reading that won't be fun, but we need to learn it. So both English and Spanish legacy definitely have their cruelties, but you can make the argument that perhaps English legacy is more cruel because of their efforts at displacement and really outright extermination. They want the native cultures completely destroyed. The Spanish actually adopt some of the native cultures more freely. A little bit more with the Spanish legacy. Spread of Christianity is going to occur through much of Central and South America. It is very much a Catholic region these days, right? And so we're going to see much destruction of the native religions that occurred there. We're going to see a spread of Spanish language and customs, and hundreds of Spanish towns will flourish in the Americas. And what we have is the legacy of Spanish conquest in Central and South America is often called the Black Legend. The Black Legend will be a term developed among South American natives. And basically the Black Legend states that Spanish conquerors tortured and butchered Indians, stole their gold, infected them with smallpox, and left misery behind. And there's definitely a lot of truth to that legend, but there are those who sometimes say that the Black Legend is somewhat exaggerated because of the concept that the Spanish adopted some of those cultures, and there was more of a mixing of cultures here than occurred in some other European explorations. I'm going to read a quote here. Okay, and this quote is actually from the old text, but I still wanted to use it because I thought it was pretty good. So I'm going to read a quote here from the old textbook, not the one you're currently reading, just because I thought it still fit my lecture here. Here's their quote about the Black Legend, and I'll just close with this. The Spanish invaded and did indeed kill, enslave, and infect countless natives, but they also erected a colossal empire sprawling from California and Florida to Tierra del Fuego in, in South America, modern day Argentina. They grafted their culture, laws, and religion onto a wide array of native societies, laying the foundation for a score of Spanish speaking nations. They develop mixed cultures and ancestries as opposed to Northern Europeans who will seek to destroy, displace, or forcibly assimilate tribes. So I guess that's somewhat of defense of what the Spanish did to these peoples. But you're going to see in some coming readings that Spanish exploration uh, definitely had its degree of cruelty. I appreciate your attention to these lectures, kids, and I do expect you to post a key question or comment that I will respond to.